Hi everyone, good evening. I hope you can hear me. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. My name is Vivek, and I'm the founder and CEO at Live Life. As you can see, I've had various trends. In the corporate world as a startup, company I started and sold, invested in multiple companies, etc. But the Live Life story started primarily given that I was diagnosed as being diabetic around 14, 15 years back. And, there was a time when we sold the company, had time on my hands. And one of the things I wanted to do was to fix my health, and that took me down tens of thousands of pages of research, speaking to 1,500 people. And then I believed that I knew what it might take to undo this ailment for me. And as that started working out, essentially realizing the numbers that's out there, decided that, hey, this probably should be something that we do. And that's where the whole journey for Live Out Life started. Over the next 45, 50 minutes, I'd like to cover a bunch of content. And as I do that, should you have any questions, please do use, there is something called as a Q&A button that you will see, or a chat button. Please do type out your questions there. And in the last 10, 15 minutes, we'll open it up and try and answer any questions that you might have. So with that, let's get into exploring this question: diabetes reversal, right? Is it really possible, right? And the broad agenda being, one, what is the burden of diabetes, right? One, at an individual level, but also at a larger level, and why is it that we need to worry about it? Uh, what our doctors have told us and the truth in it. What have our doctors not told us, right? I mean, do we know everything that we need that worries us about being diabetic? Do we know what the underlying root cause is? Do we understand that medicines don't necessarily treat our diabetes, that it is reversible, right? And what's the right lifestyle for us to power ourselves way out of being diabetes? What are the kind of tests one needs to be doing to actually keep track? Like, what is the science behind diabetes reversal? Talk briefly about A, what we do at Live Life, and B, some of the webinars that are upcoming. Right. So that's broadly what I'd like to cover. So, obviously multiple reasons to worry, right? And this is at a macro level of the, roughly 6, 7 billion people that exist in the world. It's only a matter of time that, in the next 10, 15 years, we're supposed to hit a billion plus of them as being diabetic. Currently, it's roughly half of that. And India, right, is at 77 million, second on the global tally. But the belief is the real number is close to twice of this, right? There's 50% people that don't even know that they have diabetes, right? Diabetes is obviously compared to the magnitude of various things that we see, including COVID, it claims many more lives, obviously at a gradual pace and with multiple manifestations of the disease, right? It's a leading cause of kidney failure, lower limb amputations, heart disease, and so on, right? Why are we falling prey to this? And this obviously is not even an infectious disease, despite so much, research and medical advancements. And I think that's essentially what we will explore. And obviously, we'll also bring it down from statistics at a large level to at an individual level. What does it mean? So, what have our doctors told us about this, and what is the truth in it? Let's just quickly explore a few of these. One, diabetes is, high sugar in the blood, right? So let's all understand, yes, that is true, that it is high sugar in the blood, but it is much, much more, right? First, the cause of diabetes is not sugar in the blood. Second, this is just a symptomatic manifestation. There are multiple other things at play leading to various complications, and we'll talk about it. It is a metabolic syndrome. Multiple facets of our metabolism will not be working well if you are diabetic, right? Now, if you take a look, once you have diabetes, it can never be cured. Not true, right? Especially when we're talking about type 2 diabetes, the narrative needs to change. And I think part of what we're trying to do today is talk about a narrative where diabetes is something like many other ailments that we can cure. Right? So typically, the advice is you should avoid consuming sugar if you're diabetic. That's true, but not completely. When we say sugar, most of us end up thinking about sugar as white sugar, brown sugar, etc. And some of us extend that to also include, let's say, jaggery, honey, and so on. But the reality is what this really means, and I think that is missing in terms of the understanding of a lot of people, is anything that once we eat that gets converted to glucose within the body is what is sugar, right? So for example, any carbohydrate that we eat ends up being converted to glucose. Now you take a look at it, there is chocolate which probably has that nutrition label. You'll see that there's 14.6 grams, right? That's there, which is of carbohydrate, of which 7 grams is sugar, right? It's all 14.6 grams minus of the fiber that gets consumed. Whereas if you look on the other side, tomato ketchup, it is typically savory or spicy, right? And typically in our mind, we may never assume that, hey, it has sugar. But if you take a look at the carbohydrate, right, you will realize that in 15 grams, in 1 tablespoon, 5 grams, which is 33% of that ketchup, one third is actually, will get converted to glucose, right? So we need to understand when we say we should avoid consuming sugar, what does it actually mean? It means anything that once we ingest, once it gets metabolized, gets absorbed as glucose is something that's harming us. And hence it's become super important. It doesn't matter whether it's sweet, spicy, it's a main, it's a side, etc. And I think that's where lack of the right nutritional advice, we believe we're doing all the right things. Hey, I'm having my coffee without sugar and that's okay. And it's not, right? The bread that you're having, almost 100% is a sugar in that sense, right? The paratha you're having, the rice you're having, etc., etc. So one needs to know this well and be able to apply it. So, for example, the other advice we get is, hey, replace white rice with wheat, millets, etc. Now let's understand. Now, if you take 100 grams of anything, what percentage of that gets converted to glucose? Now, if you take a look, white rice is obviously top of the charts at around 87 grams, right? So if we 87 grams of the 100 grams gets converted to glucose when we consume it, but you look at everything else, not too different. Obviously, relatively, one may be a little lower, one may be a little higher, but starting with ragi, we talk about quinoa, we talk about millets, we talk about everything is 65-70% high and greater, is made out of carbohydrates, and all of that get translated to glucose slash sugar when we consume it. And all of them, if we want to improve our diabetic condition, are not helping, right? This includes lentils, right? I mean, typically we believe any dal that we eat, is actually protein. Let's understand that 65% plus of that is not protein, it is actually carbohydrates, which means it is glucose slash sugar that's entering our body, right? So the other belief is obviously that, medicines solve or cure for diabetes. That's, forget that being true. It's absolutely not true. More importantly, there are some medicines that we may be eating that's actually making our condition worse, right? If anyone here or anybody that we know is actually injecting insulin, please know that it is making our diabetes worse while it is helping us manage the symptom. If you see over time, almost always our dose of medicine only increases, our dose of insulin only increases. So I would like to ask a question. For example, if you have any kind of an infection, we take an antibiotic, we take a tablet, our condition gets better and we stop taking the tablet. Why is it that in the case of diabetes, we start on a regimen of medication and every couple of years the dose only increases? All that should tell us is that our underlying condition is actually becoming worse, right? So then what does the medicine do? All medicines potentially help with managing the symptom in the short term. Some medicines help delay the scaling of the complications. None of them cure for the underlying problem that's causing diabetes, which is why once we start, it only increases. Specifically, if the tablet that we are on talks has something called as the sulfonylurea, right? It could be something called glympyride or glycoside, etc., etc. Or if it is insulin, or if it's got something called as TZDs, these are in fact making our diabetes underlying root cause worse. In the short term, they may help with getting our glucose levels down, which is the symptom of being diabetic. But the underlying condition, the metabolic condition that is making us diabetic, actually becomes worse. And over time, which is why one of the reasons why our dose keeps increasing. Many of us blame our parents, our forefathers, saying, hey, it's a gift that they've given me. My parents are diabetic, my grandparents were diabetic, it is in my genes. It's unfortunate, but there's nothing I can do. All right. While broadly this is untrue, genes do play a role. But let's understand that what's at play is not necessarily the genes, but what we're getting from our parents or getting from their parents are our lifestyle choices and habits, right? What my grandparents used to make is what my parents ended up eating as they were growing up, and that became their practice. What they ate, when they ate, their approach to exercise, their approach to sleep, etc., is very similar, and that gets passed on from generation to generation. For example, what food I enjoy the most is what my mom used to make as I was growing up. And my whole expectation is, hey, that's the kind of food that is good, and that's the kind of food that I enjoy, right? And that's conditioning that happens. In reality, while genes may or may not, play a role in figuring out the predisposition of me becoming diabetic or not, the reality is it is the bouquet of choices that we make every day, right? That is more of what's causing the diabetes, and that's more of what we've gone from our parents who have got it from their parents than the actual genes. The other thing is exercise a lot. Uh, Not really, right? I think there is, and we will realize with many things, too less of something is a problem, but too much of something is also a problem, right? Exercise obviously is advantageous and helps us and something we need to do. But that being said, 2 points I'd like to make. One, not every exercise directly helps our metabolism, especially when we look at exercise from the lens of diabetes. There are certain routines that play more of a role in improving metabolism, certain kind of muscle fibers called slow twitch muscle fibers, etc., than everything else. Secondly, if we exercise too much, it is actually pro-inflammatory on the one hand. It is activates a pathway called as the mTOR pathway that actually negatively impacts us. So exercise does play a role, but don't take a single vector approach to the solution. Balance out multiple things that together will help us improve diabetes, right? So that being said, let me take a quick detour from the agenda, right? To introduce an actor that plays a critical role in our journey with diabetes, right? Obviously, we've all heard of insulin, especially in the context of diabetes. Uh, Obviously, we know that as diabetes becomes worse, we end up injecting insulin, etc., etc. Right? But I think insulin and the way it behaves and works in the body is very critical for us to understand, to know what is the underlying root cause, and hence to understand what might be the solution that will help us conquer diabetes. So, what is insulin? It is a very critical hormone. It's released by and made by and released by the beta cells in our pancreas. Different functions plays multiple roles in regulating metabolism. One key one is it helps in the entry of glucose into every cell. And I would urge you, think of every cell in the human body like a automobile engine. It needs fuel to go in and it produces energy. So the collective energy, as I'm speaking, as I'm thinking, as my hands are gesticulating, all of this energy is coming from energy that is being produced by pretty much every cell in our body. And our cells run on multiple fuel. One fuel is glucose. And for glucose to enter the cell, think of insulin being the key, right? That's one role. The other role that insulin plays, it plays a key role in facilitating storage of fat, right? So, the body is like a master alchemist, and most of it is being done by our liver. It can take anything and convert it to anything. For example, if we have an overload of glucose in our body, because let's say that's a reflection of the kind of diet we have, the body doesn't want a high level of glucose. So what it does is the brain signals conversion of some of that glucose to fat. And where does it happen? It happens primarily in our liver, right? Now, higher the insulin, more is the conversion of glucose to fat, and hence more is the storage of fat in our body. And as a part of this, one of the things that does end up happening is this extra fat that gets stored in and around our liver, what's called visceral fat and ectopic fat, and that can impact the functioning of the liver. Doesn't end there. If it's sustained over a period of time, same thing happens to our pancreas, the skeletal muscle that have fat deposits, etc. So there is a specific destination for fat, what are called adipocytes. While they are getting filled, it is also possible that the liver, the pancreas, the skeletal muscle, all of them end up with fat deposits. One typical sign of that is if the middle of the body is larger than the proportionally than the rest of the body. If there's abdominal obesity or central obesity, it's a sign that there is fat collection that is happening in and around our abdominal organs. Now, fat is the energy that the body stores for the future. In the case of a rainy day, if I'm stranded on an island, nothing to eat, then I will remove that. Think of it like a fixed deposit or investment, break it and convert it into my savings account and then consume it. And think of glucose as being your savings account where money goes in and then you consume it and you use it, right? So the other thing it does is prevention, or it inhibits the conversion of fats to glucose, all right? And basically lipolysis or gluconeogenesis, these are all the processes that happen in the body, and insulin plays a key role in controlling these. Obviously, a good, well-working insulin helps in hormone control of multiple things, directly or indirectly impacting leptin, glucagon, etc., etc. Now, if we end up with high levels of insulin, there's a problem, right? First is what triggers high level of insulin. Any carbohydrate that we eat needs our body to produce insulin to help in metabolizing it. If there is excess protein, there's a non-linear production of insulin. If there's a lot of trans fat that we eat, fructose, again, not necessarily from fruits, which is a minor component, but fructose from processed food. So lots of processed food sweet, salty, spicy, tasteless, every one of them ends up using something called as high fructose corn syrup, and that gives us significantly high level of fructose, right, and sucrose. So sorry, fructose and glucose. So you know historically through fruits we used to get 10, 15, 20 grams of fructose a day, but with the increased consumption of processed food, that's closer to 100, 150 grams. Unlike glucose, fructose is more dangerous because glucose can be used by every cell in our body to produce energy. Whereas fructose, if my weight is 72 kgs, let's say pretty much cells that support the 72 kgs across the body can consume glucose. However, my 2 kg liver will have to take the complete burden of the fructose. Close to 100% of the fructose can be metabolized only in the liver. That translates to fat in the liver at a disproportionate level. Same with alcohol, right? The more we eat, each time we eat, our body produces insulin. Now, essentially, everything that we see are triggers for two things. One, insulin production, and two, extent of insulin production, right? Or the number of times we produce insulin. When we eat frequently, every time we eat, the frequency of insulin production increases. If we eat carb, the amount of insulin production increases. If we get stressed, stress is not just psychological, it's got a significant physiological aspect to it. And there's a cascade of hormonal action that results in higher level of insulin. So first thing that happens is we make choices. Those choices result in our body having a high level of insulin, right? Now, what this leads to is what's called hyperinsulinemia or high blood insulin. Essentially, consistently, if the level of insulin in our body remains high, it translates to a condition called as insulin resistance. What that means is to do the same job, the amount of insulin that our body needs to produce will become higher. So then it gives rise to a vicious cycle, which is the actions we take need our body to make high insulin. That high insulin results in a condition of insulin resistance. And because the efficiency of insulin is going down, to do the same job, our body then starts to produce even higher insulin. So essentially, the body produces high insulin, effectiveness goes down. To do the same job, you need the effectiveness to become higher, so the body responds to producing even more. And that gets into a vicious cycle. But the beginning of this is not within the body, is based on choices that we make. We end up making choices that enable a high level of insulin pretty much all the time. And that hyperinsulinemia leads to insulin resistance setting in. And once you become insulin resistant, you don't need the triggers, right? The high level of insulin increases insulin resistance, the insulin resistance increases the amount of insulin, right? And when that happens, like I explained, the visceral adiposity or fat collection around the belly will increase, right? State of inflammation in the body will increase. And because of this, we typically tend to put on weight. There are unlucky few who don't put on weight. And I say unlucky because when we put on weight, it is clear to us that there potentially is a metabolic problem. But for some people, externally it is not visible weight, but internally the visceral organs or the abdominal organs are becoming fattier and there's fat deposition around them, right? These are unlucky because they believe all is well and it's not visible. This is what's called tophi, which is thin on the outside and fat on the inside, right? Whereas if you're fat on the outside of if your tummy is bulging, that's a clear sign of the onset of insulin resistance, right? This again leads to a series of conditions that leads to plaque formation. Hence, diabetes is probably one of the leading causes of heart disease. It leads to higher blood pressure. Basically, two things: the retention of sodium in the body increases, and hence the retention of fluids in the body increases, and that in turn leads to high blood pressure. Secondly, the flexibility or elasticity of our arteries, some vasculature reduces. And so, when there was greater fluid, what could expand and then contract when the level of fluid was lower, we lose that flexibility. And that again leads to higher blood pressure. Triglycerides, which I would arguably say are more dangerous than what we've been fed, which is LDL being bad cholesterol and HDL being good cholesterol, starts increasing, and that's a more dangerous factor than anything else, right? This increased level of androgens or male hormones, specifically in women, that leads to a path that takes them towards PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, right? So it all begins with our levels of insulin going high. Now, in a normal condition, right, the insulin, like I said, is the key, opens the door to the cell and glucose is put in. Whereas once we become insulin resistant, it manifests in one of two ways. One, where it is doing its job, but the cell is full of glucose, right? Now, you can open it, but you can't put more glucose inside. And hence, glucose in the blood is increasing, but the brain will process it as, hey, for some reason, looks like my insulin is not effective, and it manufactures even more insulin. To a limited extent, the more insulin can show a little more glucose inside the cell, but again, it will stop, and which is why the levels of insulin that the body makes will keep becoming higher. And there's another context where, if there's a problem with some of the receptors, basically the receptors may not respond to insulin, and hence the level of insulin needed to try and make them respond could increase. The difference between the two is, in one, the cells are full of glucose, whereas in the other, the cells may not necessarily be able to get that glucose. And in diabetes, you see both. When uncontrolled diabetes happens and you start to lose weight, right, that's when the latter is at play, right, where body is producing more and more insulin, but it's not effectively being able to put the glucose into the cell. It will result in two things. One, the blood glucose levels in the blood will increase, and two, the body will switch to fat for metabolism, and that's when you start to lose weight, because the stored fat starts being consumed. In the when it is in the case of overflow, there you don't lose, in fact you put on weight, right? And both these are at different points in time that they occur, and insulin resistance is responsible for both of these, right? So the crimes committed by insulin, one is high level of insulin. It leads to insulin resistance, and insulin resistance in turn increases the state of inflammation. Think of that as rusting equivalent within the body. Your arteries, your tissues, your organs, all of them start getting impacted. And inflammation is a path that takes you down to multiple diseases, and something we'd like to keep low, right? I'm talking about chronic inflammation here. There is something called as oxidative stress, which is harmful to us, and that's something that gets enabled when one is insulin resistant. There's the process of what's called glycation, where there are molecules that have a layer of glucose that inhibits identification and usage of those molecules, right? So that again is not necessarily a good thing. The triglycerides increase because all that extra glucose that's getting converted to fat is getting converted to triglycerides and being shipped to different parts of the body for storage. And that is why serum or blood levels of triglycerides will increase. What's called VLDL, which are the packages that contain the triglycerides, those will increase, etc. In the arteries of our brain, there are proteins which are part of, when we use our brain, that get produced, called as beta amyloid and tau protein. Now these, if one is insulin resistant, don't get cleansed right every night, and they start accumulating, and over a period of time that impacts nutrition to different neurons, and slowly over time it leads to us losing our cognitive capabilities, and that takes us down a path to Alzheimer's and dementia, etc. So the other things that it impacts because of this, one, typically our obesity increases. Two, multiple hormonal imbalances end up happening. So all of them become resistant, which means to do the same job, the amount our body produces is high. And one thing I'd like to say unambiguously, for any reason, if any one of us believed like I did, that type 2 diabetes, the problem is my body is not making insulin, because I know that as my condition becomes worse, I might need to inject insulin. That is not right. The problem with type 2 diabetes is our body is producing more insulin than we need. Right? It maxes out on the ability to produce insulin. It's not a manufacturing problem. It's an efficiency problem. As we produce more, the efficiency of insulin keeps going down, which is why even if we start injecting insulin, our body is producing as much as it can. On top of that, we are injecting insulin. So temporarily, it helps put glucose into the cells because of extra force of the insulin. But very quickly, the level of insulin resistance increases even more, which is why the levels of insulin we take also keep increasing, right? And as this happens, the onset of what's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease sets in, because as more and more fat production is happening, some of them is starting to collect in your liver. There are imbalances in your cholesterol profile, which is what is called dyslipidemia. There is plaque formation that gets enabled, which is what is called atherosclerosis. Your endothelial, which is your arteries innermost layer, dysfunction sets in. And then if you take a look, that starts manifesting itself as type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease and PCOS, Alzheimer's, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, to an extent contributes to cancer as well, because when one is insulin resistant, the process of cellular maintenance, what's called autophagy, gets impacted. And the garbage cells, which is senescent cells or weak cells and dead cells, don't get recycled to create new cells, and they start collecting in the body. And when that happens, they're the most susceptible. Our aging becomes accelerated, and our susceptibility to disease, including diseases where the cell gets impacted, like cancer, becomes higher, right? And eventually, this does end up in end state kind of complications, be it, and this across the board, right? It could be chronic kidney disease. There's something called retinopathy, neuropathy, nephropathy, gangrene, that is when your limbs may get amputated, etc. So I would say not all diseases are the same, and diabetes is most dangerous for two reasons. One, it slowly builds up. It lulls us into a false sense of security. I'm popping a pill, HbA1c, okay, hey, all is well. In a couple of years, HbA1c starts going up. You're given a new medication. You continue. So it's very slow cascade of increasing. And for example, if I had a broken hand, I know I can't function without it. I will go now. I will get it fixed, put it in a plaster, or get a surgery done and get it healed. Whereas in this case, like I said, because of the slow pace of development, from the time you're insulin resistant to the time that you get diagnosed as a full-blown diabetic is probably around 10, 12, 15 years, right? So it's like a snowball that's slightly growing. But the problem is, as the magnitude increases, the magnitude with which it will crush us, there's nothing we can do, right? So that's the other problem. Instead of, let's say, a heart condition that impacts only the heart, or a limb condition that impacts only the limb, diabetes impacts everything, top to bottom, left to right, from the brain to our feet, right? From the eyes to essentially a heart and liver and kidneys, and every part of a body gets impacted with diabetes. And before we realize it, and when I say before, it's not like it happens in an instant, it happens over years. But because we are lulled into this false sense of security, by the time we want to act on it, there is some damage that's already happened, and so on. But that being said, any time is a good time to A, limit the damage, and B, change the way your metabolism works so that you no longer are insulin resistant, etc. Right? So moving on to some of the, from the detour, coming back, some of the things that, may or may not have told you, may or may not know, right? Like I said, why care? Very big reasons. Multiple things, like I said, top to bottom, left to right, get impacted. So if you are diagnosed as being pre-diabetic, please take care now, and much before the damage kind of becomes worse and exacerbates, fix it, right? If you are at an advanced stage, arrest it, right? Start the U-turn. You may be told that it's a one way, but there is a U-turn that's possible, and I'll talk about that. So the root cause is what is not being solved for. So the root cause of diabetes is high insulin. Any medicine that actually makes my body produce more insulin is actually making my diabetes worse, right? So that's the problem. There are multiple medicines we are on which may tell us that glucose levels are going down, but it's not about glucose levels. The problem we're trying to solve is, can my insulin resistant, where to do the same job, I need more insulin. Can I make it insulin sensitive? Which is, the insulin can do the same job at a lower level, right? So that's the problem, and that's the root cause. And like I said, I talked about multiple reasons that lead to it, which is multiple meals and not the right kind of nutrients, inactive lifestyle, stress, lack of good sleep, all of those. We need to fix that and solve for the root cause is the only thing to do. Whereas most of the solutions available don't do that. Like I said, medicines do not help solve diabetes. They help manage and delay the onset of complications. So I would, my advice, doing nothing is not an option. At a minimum, we should ensure that we take steps that will delay the complications. But let's all be aware that when we are prescribed any medicine, it is not solving for the diabetes, right? It's only the symptoms that are being managed, and over time, the dosage, like I said, keeps increasing. In some cases, the medicines lead to higher level of insulin being produced in the body, which actually makes our diabetic condition worse, while in the shorter term, the blood sugar levels come down, right? The fat around the belly continues to accumulate, etc. Diabetes is reversible, and nobody tells us that, right? We are told that it is chronic and progressive. What does chronic mean? Once you get it, it does not go away. What does progressive mean? Over time, it only gets worse. And the reason we are told chronic and progressive is because the medicines we take are not solving it, but delaying the complications and slowing it down. And over time, it gets worse. And hence, it has to be chronic and progressive. But the reason that is the case is that the medicines are not solving for the root cause, but are solving for the symptom. Reversible is only possible if you solve for the underlying root cause. So if your blood glucose and insulin levels come down, if the fat around our abdomens can reduce, insulin sensitivity can be restored. And if our insulin becomes sensitive again, then we're no longer diabetic, right? And diabetes can be reversed. So the right lifestyle is a combination of what we eat and when we eat. That's around 70% of the solution, right? Getting the right nutrients in, ensuring we eat at the right time, and ensuring that what we eat gives us the right nutrients. The top row is around 60 to 70% of what can help improve our diabetic condition. The 10-15% are each of what we see below. Stress management, 10-15% impact, sleeping well, 10-15% impact, the right fitness routines, 10-15% impact. If we want to fix it fast, we should engage all of them. If we want to ensure that we want to make minimum changes, the one thing to change is, what do you eat and when do you eat, right? Some of the tests that we do, which is fasting blood sugar, HbA1c, etc., let me tell you, those are lagging indicators. That means by the time your HbA1c rises, by the time your fasting blood sugar rises, the underlying condition has already been in existence for 10, 12 years. So those are not necessarily the right, they're telling you what has already happened, right? What you need to be truly measuring is, for example, fasting insulin matters more than fasting blood sugar. But almost nobody asks you to measure fasting insulin. Similarly, total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, which are what get a lot of attention, don't matter as much as the ratio of your triglycerides to your HDL. Triglycerides, think of them as garbage. HDL, think of them as garbage trucks. If I have more garbage and very few garbage truck, very dangerous for my heart health. Whereas if I have enough trucks that can take care of the garbage, my heart is safe. So one metric that I would look for to assess overall metabolic syndrome risk or diabetes risk or heart risk is triglycerides divided by HDL. Chronic inflammation is something that we need to be watchful of, monitor and fix. And one way is to periodically look at something, and there are multiple other factors, but one key biomarker is what's called HSCRP, which is high sensitive C-reactive protein. Right now, these are some of the things that are more important, and there are many more. And I think we've defined this, we get it done. You can reach out to us if you want to assess under the hood. How is your body performing? We've got a diagnostic test that we sell, which helps solve for, understand this, solve for this, etc. So very quickly getting to the science of diabetes reversal, I'm sure from what we've spoken, you have a sense for it. But, one thing I want to say is we know lifestyle diseases have many things. Like I said, fatty liver, high BP, PCOS, type 2 diabetes, all of these. We might believe all are separate diseases, all symptoms are different, medication are different, the doctors we see for each one are different, etc., etc. Is that the case? If we peel it further, we realize that there are some things that are common to all of them. Right? There is what's called visceral fat. I talked about it. Fat in and around your abdominal organs, hormonal imbalances, typically excess weight, collection of biological garbage within the body. All of these are common to everything that we see on top. Now, if we peel that further, we realize that pretty much everything that we see on top to a large extent will have people having imbalanced insulin, not low insulin, mind you. Insulin that is high, but not effective. Right? Almost all of them will have increased state of chronic inflammation. Almost all of this will have you being immunocompromised, which is your defense mechanisms of the body, what we know as immunity, but there are other facets, right? There's, various ways our body's protective mechanisms work, right, which is phenomenal, right? So just like the country has an army, a navy, a air force, a BSF, a CRPF, etc., same way our body has what are called macrophages and natural killer cells and B cells and T cells, all of which come under the umbrella of immunity. But in addition to that, there are stem cells, there's the sanctity of your DNA, there is your gut microbiome, there is your angiogenesis. All of them are other mechanisms that have a protective role in keeping our body safe and helping us fight invaders, organic or inorganic. In pretty much all of them, the levels and strength of our body's defense mechanism is weaker. Now, if you take a look at the external circle, when we're trying to solve for that, when we take medicines for that, we are only managing the symptom, right? Which is why what we do when we do that is management. Whereas if you want to really solve for it, cure it, reverse it, it needs to solve for the underlying root cause. And medicines don't help with solving for the underlying root cause. Right? So, quick summary, the villain is what I call is a three-eyed monster that we need to conquer if you want to reverse diabetes. Imbalanced insulin and other hormones, increased inflammation, impaired immunity, like I talked about. There is a sidekick approach, which is a symptomatic approach, which I call a mess. Why do I call it a mess? It is medicines for life. It is eating less, calorie counting, etc. It's a single vector approach. Hey, I'll stop eating sugar with my coffee. I'll stop eating sweets. I will exercise and walk every day, etc. Right? On their own, they will help a little, but not help a lot. Right? Or surgery. It could be proactive surgery like a bariatric surgery, etc., or a reactive surgery once there's a problem, right? Like getting a stent put in and so on and so forth. Please know that the symptomatic approach is not solving the problem, but also note that doing nothing is not an option, right? If you have the problem, at a minimum, you need to adopt one or more of the symptomatic approach, the mess solution. But if you want to really solve for it, right, then you need to solve for the underlying root cause, the hero, which I call fresh. And this is not medicine. These are lifestyle choices, right? It is how do I use food and fasting to help my body work? how do I choose what I do and when I do? What's called alignment, rhythm alignment to our circadian clock, right? Eating at 11 a.m. versus eating at 11 p.m., the same thing. The way our body responds is completely different, right? So different organs are at peak level of performance at different points in time in a day. We need to ensure we align the activity to when an organ is at peak performance, right? Exercise and fitness, but not broad-based. One doesn't need to become a Salman Khan or a Hrithik Roshan. There are certain routines which help drive better metabolism. Those are the ones that we need more than, if you want to build muscle, that's fine, but that goal is different, right? To improve yourself against diabetes, there are certain other kind of exercises that help build and drive better metabolism that become more important, right? Sleep, super important, not like I was saying necessarily for rest or rejuvenation, but more to drive the cellular maintenance that happens when we sleep, which is called autophagy. Super important. Otherwise, biological garbage starts collecting in the body, taking us on a path of accelerated aging and a higher susceptibility to disease. And a harmonious mind, which is stress free, is very important, because stress, not just in the mind, but impacts the metabolism, impacts insulin levels. Consistent state of being stressed, our insulin levels increase and our insulin resistance cycle starts, right? So you need a solution that encompasses all of those. But in those, like I said in the previous slide, what you eat when you eat is probably 60 to 70% of what will move the needle significantly, right? So coming to what it is that we do in a very simplistic level, we create stories like this, right? This is a real client of ours, came to us when his HbA1c was 12.4. His fasting was probably 300, and his postprandial was close to 500. He was on multiple medication, and in the 3 months that we worked with him directly, that 12.4 came down to 5.4. The three medicines came down to zero. His 91 kgs came down to 73 kgs. And since then, he's further taken it down 4.6 is his HbA1c. He eats normal food, but his postprandial is around 120, 130. Essentially, by doing what we did, his body is starting to work, has gone back to work like how it was when he was healthy. He eats the same food, maybe a festive meal, his body continues to function like how it used to when he was healthy, right? So these are the kind of stories that we create, and people that we partner with and bring about transformation of the health. How do we do it? One, we've got a program that has every vector of fresh that we include, that helps in swinging your pendulum back from a state of being diabetic to a state of good health. It includes everything: the food piece, the fasting piece, alignment of the rhythm, circadian rhythm alignment, exercise and fitness, etc. And also includes the feedback loop, which is diagnostics, includes the advice, which is various kinds of consultants, be diabetologists, to nutritionists, to etc. etc. So a way to start working with us is what we call a diabetes reversal Kickstarter. This is a 10-day program. This guarantees outcomes, right? If you're on oral medication, at least one, if not two downgrades of your oral medication will happen in the 10 days. You will lose 3+% of fat if you are not the TOFI and have obesity, right? There will be 20 to 30% reduction in your fasting blood sugar with the reduction in medicine, right? If you're on insulin, at least 30% reduction in the insulin dosage. All this in 10 days. The goal of the 10 days is for you to see that the U-turn is possible, right? Is to understand that this is doable and be convinced about it before embarking on a larger diabetes reversal journey. It includes here tasty food that we deliver to you every meal, right, through the day. Exercise, yoga, and meditation classes that we conduct for you that have been designed to improve your metabolism, right? There's what we call an insulin resistance risk assessment. What is the extent of insulin resistance do you have, right? And that will tell us how much of work is needed to get it back to being sensitive. There's a personal alt life coach that works with you, single point to navigate through the company. There's a convenient app. At the end of this, we will have a discussion on, for you, what is the right diabetes reversal roadmap, right? And then, give you options of, if you want to do it on your own, how could you do it? If you want to do it with us, how is it that we can help you, etc. And what's more, given the 100% success that we've had with every client, we're happy to say that 100% money back. If it doesn't work, we'll get you money back if you do this, right? Please note that this is not something that reversal will happen in 10 days. It is a way to show you that it is possible and you'll see significant results. But depending on how long you've had it, how bad is it, the extent of medication, etc., your age, the individual timeline, etc., may be a little different. And that's what, once you do this, we will discuss and kind of give you what your diabetes reversal roadmap should be, right? And obviously, there's a lot that we've put into, the best of science, right? The best of precision nutrition, holistic, getting every angle, the food part taken care of, the mind and body fitness taken care of, diagnostics and predictive diagnostics at it inside, the entire set of experts needed. All of this is something that we've built. Excuse me. In addition to this, we have got an ongoing research and R&D team. We built a deep diagnostic AI where there are early warning signs that we can do, looking at some of the parameters which typically don't even get tested. This continuous culinary design innovation to ensure that the food we give, which is safe, natural, but also tasty and variety food. All right. How are we able to get those goals? We've got, specifically designed body and mind fitness to improve against diabetes. The nutrition itself, we use only chemical-free organic ingredients. We use, like I said before, no processed food, and that means that the amount of machinery or equipment that our kitchen needs will be 3 times. The space we need is 3 times, because we don't use anything that comes in a bottle or a box. We get all the natural ingredients and make everything that we use in our kitchen, right? There's around 100 different rules that get validated every day. So the math is the same, but the food you get will be variety full. Is your sodium and potassium balanced? Is your calcium and magnesium balanced? What's your omega-3 to omega-6 ratio? What are your macronutrient ratios? So there's around 100 of these, which is what we know leads to changing the way our body functions, and that the math is driven by the AI system. It's same every day, right? But the art comes in giving different kinds of things: South Indian, North Indian, international, variety, full, tasty. And as you go through that, your body is actually transforming. All right. We deliver it 3 times every day. And, this is primarily because the best nutrition is with fresh food. We cook it fresh and deliver to wherever you are. You could be at home, you could be at office for each meal, and that gets delivered there. And to make it easy and convenient, one is the think of them as a relationship manager and a coach that's there available to you. The app where, hey, today I'm at work, today I'm in office, send the food here, there, pause it, I'm traveling, etc. Anywhere, wherever you could be, food comes. The packaging we use, we don't want to create more plastic waste. Essentially, it's something that we pick up and bring back, glassware that we send it in. And the reason for us to do all this is to guarantee outcomes and make the discipline something that's sustainable. And once you do this, we also work with you on various ways of enabling you to sustain this on your own once you get off the program. All right. So this is what we do. In addition, one of the sustenance tools is where we've all the high quality ingredients that we use and some additional products that we've created. As a diabetic, sweets are no, but anything you see on the screen and much more on our website is available. Nothing will happen to your blood sugar levels. There's no processed food in it, right? We've created great collection of stuff, be it a chocolate bark or a mousse or a pista and almond burfi or a cookie, etc., or a cake. We've created flour that you should be using, which has 0 grains in it, right? And yet it's a round chapati you'll get, or a round paratha you will get, and it won't impact your blood glucose levels. We use 0 grains, and our store will find 0 grains. But the products that we've been able to come up with will help make it easier. So obviously, this is something you can check out. Our website for this is what's called retail.livealtlife.com. And there's a coupon code, unlock alt life, that you can kind of use. these are some of the upcoming webinars focused on diabetes, super passionate about, how do we conquer diabetes and get more and more people to no longer be diabetic. So I think in the next one, we'll be talking to somebody who's gone through this journey. And I think that may be fascinating for some of you, right? How do we use fasting as a tool, deciphering nutrition labels and some of the things that are hidden there, some of the common myths. So these are things we cover. You can look at our website and sign up, and it'll be super interesting. So I think that's broadly what I wanted to cover. At the end, I want to say, let's together change the narrative for ourselves, for other folks that we know. Diabetes is reversible. We just need to, work with the right changes to our lifestyle, and we get there. Live Out Life's focus is on partnering with you to get done. And like I said, various ways to engage, including some deep diagnostics that we do, which is other products that you could buy, etc. So thank you for your time. I hope there are a few things you've learned which are different from what your view was, and also understood, what will lead. Our team is super passionate about solving for this. Any way you want help in getting through your diabetes journey, please do reach out. It could be for products you'll consume, but or just advice that you'd like to apply. And we're happy to work with you as you go through this. So thank you for taking time on a Saturday to attend this. I hope this was useful. Please do take care. Now let's dive into the Q&A and see, answer any questions that you might have. Okay, one question is, I am diabetic for 3 years, 305, 230, are readings. Is it a problem? Absolutely. It's not a good set of glucose levels. I would urge you to reach out, and we are very happy to help you. You need to get that down clearly. It is causing damage to you as you leave it there. The damages from glycation, the damages from oxidative stress, microvascular disease, etc. You don't want your blood glucose levels to be at those numbers, right? So it's not something that is good for you and needs to be solved for. So please do, make sure you take care. At a minimum, start medication, or if you want to solve it once and for all, reach out and we'll tell you how that can be done. Okay, metformin is the tablet I am taking. Is metformin okay? Let's assume is the question. Metformin is not solving, but the good part is it's also not harming. So in the management path, as long as it's only metformin, it's okay, right? It's not causing you harm. But if you're anything which says, GMER to Easter, I mean, it depends on the combination that you're on. But if it is metformin plus something else, that something else is what one needs to worry about, right? I'm diagnosed with diabetes for the last 3 years. That you mean to say after 3 months of taking your program, I don't need to take any of your program, I can live like a non-diabetic, but subject to changing the lifestyle. Also, if I join your program, whether we'll have medicine during these 3 months, is your program certified by doctors? Okay. The answer is, if it's only 3 years, for sure, right? In 1 month, you'll be off medicine. Most of the people who are on oral medication get off their medication in between the 2nd and the 4th week, depending on the kind of medicine they are on. But that's not reversing diabetes. It's just getting your blood glucose levels down, and there's no need for medicines to maintain your glucose levels. That happens within 1 month, right? But that's not the reversal process. There are still steps that you need to take to get there. Can we get you there? Absolutely. And a 3-year diabetes is much, much easier. We work with people who've been diabetic for 20, 25 years on insulin, etc. So absolutely, we should be able to help you. Is your program certified by doctors? I don't know what certification means, but we have doctors that are a part of our team that will work with you, right, as we go through the process. Absolutely, are there packages for guys in pre-diabetes? The way to think about this whole pre-diabetes to 2-3-year diabetes to 5-7-year diabetes to, let's say, 15-20-year diabetes, etc. A simple way to think about it is think about a journey. Like, let's say Bangalore to Mysore. Let's say Bangalore is a state of good health and Mysore is a state of bad health. Now, Pre-diabetes is one stop on that road. Diabetes is another stop, and advanced diabetes is another stop, etc., etc. All I will say is the earlier you recognize that you have a problem, the faster and easier it is to make a U-turn and come back. For example, if you're familiar of the distance between, let's say, Bangalore and Mysore, in Bidadi, if I know that I want to come back to Bangalore, I can come back much easily, much faster. Whereas if I get to know that I'm diabetic only after I reach Mysore, obviously it will take me some time. If I know that I've reached Mysore and it's been 10 years, right? Obviously, the time it takes for you to come back is faster and easier the sooner you start the journey in your journey of diabetes. So the same package is something that somebody with pre-diabetes should take, right? Is there any time frame before which reversal is possible? My father is diabetic from 30 years. Will reversal be possible? The answer is yes. Like I was saying, this 25, 30. But that being said, I also want to set expectation here. For different people, the view on reversal is different. For somebody on insulin, a win is get me off injecting myself twice a day, thrice a day. Get me to only oral tablets, that's a win. For somebody on oral medication, it may be that, hey, I don't want to take any oral medication, right? I want to be, but I will eat this food. Somebody else may say, I don't want oral medication and I want to eat normal food. So the way to think about it is, if you're in a class, right, and all of us have been to school or college, we may want first rank, or we may want distinction, or we may want first class. But every one of them is possible. It's just the effort that we need to put is different based on what your end goal is. So for your father who's diabetic for 30 years, is reversal possible? Absolutely. Let's have that conversation. It is said that glycemic load of chana dal, tur dal, etc. Is it okay to consume little of it? Little of it, yes. But like I said, the solution for improvement is different from the solution for maintenance. Glycemic load, all of them matter in relative choices, right? Choices which is okay to choices which is not okay. The simple point I'd like to say is, if you want to improve, you should not have it. If you want to maintain where you are, you can have some of it. So like I said, the pendulum, to swing it back, the solution is different. Once we swing it back, the maintenance solution is different. In maintenance, you can have all of this, right? But to improve, it's not helping, right? I'm a diabetic from 25 years. I'm doing intermittent fasting for the last 7 months and I've stopped insulin and tabs. I'm now taking half a tab of metformin now. Could I stop that? Absolutely. And one is kudos. I think it's a great job you've done to get where you are, but you can get to a point where you don't need metformin as well.